During the divorce at 72, I decided to give everything to my husband. My lawyer begged me to stop, but I signed the documents with a smile. No one knew that I had already won the case when his lawyer read the document. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. For 45 years, I believed I knew my husband. Richard and I built our life together from nothing. A modest house in Connecticut. 2 children we raised with love. And a small business that grew into something we could be proud of. I was 72 years old, and I thought we'd spend our remaining years in the comfort we'd earned together. But life has a cruel way of revealing the truth when you least expect it. It started with small things. Richard began working late more frequently. He'd come home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, something floral and young. When I asked about it, he'd wave dismissively and say it was from a client meeting. His phone, once carelessly left on the kitchen counter, now lived permanently in his pocket. Password protected. "Richard, are you seeing someone?" I asked him one evening over dinner. He looked at me with those blue eyes that once made me feel safe. "Margaret, don't be ridiculous. I'm 68 years old. Who would I be seeing?" I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But then came the bank statements. Charges at expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel rooms in the city when he claimed to be at business conferences. Jewelry purchases that never appeared in my drawer. I sat at our kitchen table, hands trembling as I calculated the amounts. Thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. How long had this been going on? The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. I found a birthday card in his coat pocket while taking it to the dry cleaner. "To my darling Richard, thank you for making me feel alive again. Forever yours, Cynthia." There was a lipstick kiss at the bottom. My hands shook as I read it again and again, as if the words might change. Cynthia. Her name was Cynthia. That evening, I confronted him. No more hints, no more careful questions. I placed the card on the dinner table between us. "Who is she?" Richard's face went white, then red. For a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before. Panic. But it quickly transformed into something worse. Cold determination. "I want a divorce," he said flatly. "I've already spoken to my lawyer." Just like that. 45 years dismissed with a single sentence. "We can split things fairly," I began, but he cut me off. "Fair?" He laughed, a sound without humor. "Margaret, the business is in my name. The house is in my name. I've been very careful about that. You'll get what I decide to give you." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "Richard, I helped build that business. I worked there for 20 years before you convinced me to retire. You were never officially on payroll for most of it. Good luck proving your contribution in court." He stood up, adjusting his tie. "My lawyer will be in touch. I suggest you get one too." He left that night and never came back. 3 weeks later, I sat in my lawyer's office. James Richardson had been recommended by my daughter. He was reviewing Richard's proposed settlement with increasing alarm. "Mrs. Morgan, this is robbery," he said, looking up from the papers. "He's offering you $50,000 and the furniture. That's it. The business is worth at least $2 million, and the house is worth $800,000. "What are my chances if we fight?" I asked quietly. James hesitated. "Honestly, it's difficult. He's structured everything very carefully over the years. The business is solely in his name. The house is in his name. You stopped working there 15 years ago. Connecticut law would give you something, but proving your contribution after all this time, it could take years in court, cost a fortune in legal fees, and you might end up with less than if you'd—" "What if I just sign?" I interrupted. James stared at me. I'm sorry? What if I agree to his terms? Just sign everything over. Mrs. Morgan, I strongly advise against. But I was already reaching for the pen. I saw the exact moment Richard's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, realized what I was doing. She tried to hide her smile. Are you certain about this? James asked desperately. Please, think about your future. Where will you live? How will you support yourself? I signed the last page and looked up with a smile that confused everyone in the room. Don't worry, James, I said softly. I know exactly what I'm doing. Nobody knew that I'd already won. They just didn't know it yet. I left James's office and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could turn the key. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. What had I just done? I'd signed away everything, my home, my security, my future. For a moment, panic threatened to consume me. No. Stop. Think. I drove to the small apartment I'd rented after Richard left. 1 bedroom, thin walls, a view of the parking lot. This was my life now, at 72 years old. I made tea with trembling hands and sat at the tiny kitchen table, forcing myself to breathe slowly. What did I have left? I opened my notebook and began to write. This was something I'd learned in my working years. When overwhelmed, make a list. Facts, resources, options. The business Richard claimed as solely his. I'd worked there from 1985 to 2010. 25 years. I'd handled bookkeeping, client relations, inventory management. I'd been there when it was just Richard and a garage full of automotive parts. But he was right about one thing. For most of those years, I wasn't officially on the payroll. We'd thought we were being smart, saving on taxes by keeping it as a sole proprietorship. How naive I'd been. But wait. I pulled out my old filing cabinet, one of the few things I'd managed to take from the house. I'd been a meticulous record keeper. Every receipt, every bank statement, every document from our entire marriage. Richard used to tease me about it. Margaret and her filing system, he'd laugh. She could find a receipt from 1982 if you asked. I could indeed. I spent that entire night going through files. My back ached, my eyes burned, but I kept searching. And slowly, carefully, I found them. Evidence. Not just receipts. Something better. Letters. Dozens of letters from Richard to clients in the early years, signed Richard and Margaret Morgan, co-owners. Business proposals where I was listed as partner. Insurance documents naming me as co-owner. Tax returns from 1985 to 1989, where the business income was reported jointly. These were from before Richard's lawyer convinced him to restructure everything in his name alone. And then I found it, the original business registration from 1983. R&M Morgan Auto Parts, owned by Richard Morgan and Margaret Morgan. My name was right there, in faded typescript. We'd registered it together. He'd filed papers to change it to his name alone in 1990, but the original registration proved I'd been a founding partner. My hands stopped shaking. The next morning, I called a different lawyer. Not James. He was a good man, but he'd seen me sign those papers. He'd think I was unstable if I came back now. I needed someone who didn't know about my surrender yesterday. Thomas Brennan's office, a crisp voice answered. Thomas Brennan had a reputation. He was expensive, aggressive, and known for winning cases everyone else thought were lost. My daughter Sarah had mentioned him once, saying a friend's mother had used him in a divorce case. I'd like to schedule a consultation, I said. It's regarding a divorce settlement. Mr. Brennan's calendar is quite full, but we might have an opening next month. I have original business registration documents, proving joint ownership of a $2 million company that my husband claims he built alone. I also have evidence he's been hiding assets, and I signed away everything yesterday, but the papers haven't been filed yet. There was a pause. Can you be here at 2 o'clock today? Thomas Brennan was in his 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened while I explained everything: the affair, Richard's threats, my signing of the documents yesterday, and the box of evidence I'd brought. He looked through my files for 45 minutes without speaking. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Morgan, do you know what you've done? My heart sank. Made a terrible mistake? No. A slow smile crossed his face. You've given yourself the perfect position. You signed under duress, with inadequate legal representation, and without full disclosure of marital assets. More importantly, you signed yesterday, but the papers haven't been filed yet. Did Richard's lawyer say when they'd file? Next week. She said they needed to process everything. Perfect. He tapped my original business registration. This document alone changes everything. And you said Richard told you the house and business were solely in his name because you'd never contributed. Yes. In front of his lawyer. Even better. That's called fraudulent concealment. Mrs. Morgan, you haven't lost anything. You've laid a trap, and your husband walked right into it. He leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Thomas Brennan didn't waste time. By the end of our meeting, he'd outlined a strategy that made my head spin. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I wasn't drowning. First, we file a motion to set aside the settlement, he explained. We'll claim duress, inadequate representation, and failure to disclose assets. But here's the key, Mrs. Morgan. We don't just defend, we attack. Attack how? We're filing for forensic accounting of the business. We're going to examine every transaction for the past 10 years. If Richard's been hiding money, moving assets, or undervaluing the business, we'll find it. He smiled. And based on what you've told me about recent expensive dinners and hotels, I'd bet my reputation he's been using business funds for personal expenses related to his affair. The next morning, Thomas filed the paperwork. I wasn't there. He said it was better if I kept a low profile for now, but he called me at noon with news. Richard's lawyer, Patricia Chen, just called me. She's furious. She wants to know why you retained new counsel and what you think you're doing. What did you tell her? That my client has reconsidered the settlement after discovering evidence of asset concealment and marital fraud. I also informed her we'll be deposing Mr. Morgan about the business finances and his relationship with a Ms. Cynthia Reeves. I heard the sharp intake of my own breath. You know her last name? I know everything now, Mrs. Morgan. Cynthia Reeves, 34 years old, works as a sales representative for a company that supplies products to your husband's business. They've been seeing each other for approximately 3 years. He's been paying for an apartment for her in Hartford, using business funds. 3 years. While I'd been at home planning our retirement, he'd been building a whole separate life. Are you all right? Thomas asked gently. Yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. The initial shock had passed. Now I just felt cold determination. What happens next? Next, we wait for them to make a move. And Mrs. Morgan? They will make a move. Richard thought he had everything sewn up. Now he's going to panic. Thomas was right. 2 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. Richard. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since the night he'd demanded a divorce. But curiosity won. Margaret. His voice was tight, controlled. We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Richard. You hired Thomas Brennan? He spat the name like a curse. What are you trying to do? The settlement was fair. Fair? I laughed, and it felt good. You tried to steal everything I helped build over 45 years. You called $50,000 fair for half a lifetime of work. You signed the papers. Under duress, with incomplete information. My new lawyer explained that to your lawyer, didn't he? Silence on the other end. Then, Margaret, you're 72 years old. Do you really want to spend your final years in court? Fighting over money? We could resolve this amicably. Like you resolved our marriage amicably. By having a 3-year affair with a woman young enough to be your granddaughter? I heard him suck in a breath. How did you… Never mind. Margaret, be reasonable. The business is mine. I built it. We built it, I interrupted. I have the original registration papers, Richard, from 1983. R&M Morgan Auto Parts, owned by Richard Morgan and Margaret Morgan. Remember that? Or have you conveniently forgotten? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Those papers don't mean anything, he finally said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I restructured the business legally in 1990, after I'd worked there for 7 years as co-owner. My lawyer is very interested in why you restructured it, and he's even more interested in the apartment you've been paying for in Hartford. Using business funds, Richard. That's called embezzlement. You can't prove… I can prove everything. I have 45 years of records. Every bank statement, every receipt, every document. You used to laugh at my filing system. You're not laughing now, are you? Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was harder, colder. You're making a mistake, Margaret. You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret is trusting you. I hung up. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was adrenaline. I'd crossed the point of no return, and it felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. Thomas called an hour later. Richard's lawyer wants to meet. They want to negotiate. Already? They're scared, Mrs. Morgan. The forensic accounting request has them rattled. Whatever they've been hiding, they know we're going to find it. I thought about Richard's threat. He said I'd regret this. Empty words from a desperate man, Thomas assured me. Stay strong. We're winning. But as I hung up the phone, I wondered, what would Richard do when he realized he was trapped? The forensic accountant's report arrived 3 weeks later. Thomas called me to his office to review it, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice before I even sat down. Mrs. Morgan, your instincts were correct. Richard has been systematically siphoning money from the business for years. He slid a thick document across his desk. Over the past 3 years alone, he's diverted approximately $400,000 to personal use, almost all of it related to his affair with Ms. Reeves. I stared at the numbers. Luxury hotel stays, designer jewelry, the apartment rent, even a car, a BMW he'd registered in Cynthia's name. He used our business, I said slowly, the business we built together, to fund his affair. Yes, and that's not all. He's also been undervaluing the business in his financial disclosures. He claimed it's worth $1.2 million. Our analysis suggests it's closer to $3 million. Thomas leaned forward. Mrs. Morgan, we have him. Completely. That afternoon, Thomas filed an amended complaint adding charges of financial fraud and misappropriation of marital assets. He also requested an emergency freeze on all business accounts and Richard's personal accounts until the matter was resolved. The response was immediate and vicious. At 8 p.m. that night, my daughter Sarah called, her voice panicked. Mom, Dad just called me. He's furious. He's saying terrible things about you, that you're trying to destroy him, that you're being vindictive and cruel. He said if you don't drop this lawsuit, he'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. What kind of person? I asked calmly. He didn't specify. He just kept saying he has information that would ruin your reputation. Mom, what is he talking about? Nothing, sweetheart. He's desperate and he's lashing out. I paused. Did he try to turn you against me? He tried. He said you were never really a partner in the business, that you're lying about your contributions. But Mom, I remember. I remember you working there when I was little. I remember you handling the books, talking to customers. Her voice broke. How can he lie like that? Because he's protecting himself and his new life, I said quietly. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my small apartment. Richard was trying to isolate me, turn our children against me. It was a classic abuser's tactic, and for a moment, fear crept in. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Drop the lawsuit or everyone will know the truth about you. I stared at it. What truth? I'd lived an honest life. Whatever Richard was threatening was a bluff. But the messages kept coming over the next 2 days. Anonymous texts. A threatening letter pushed under my apartment door. You're going to lose everything. You're making yourself look pathetic. He was going to leave you anyway. You're old, and you weren't enough for him. That last one stung more than I wanted to admit. On the 3rd day, I arrived at my apartment to find Cynthia Reeves sitting in her car in the parking lot. She was pretty in that polished, artificial way. Blonde highlights, perfect makeup, expensive clothes. When she saw me, she got out. Mrs. Morgan, I need to talk to you. I should have walked away. Instead, I stopped. You're Cynthia. Yes. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. Look, I know you probably hate me. I don't hate you, I interrupted. I don't know you well enough to hate you. You're just the woman who helped destroy my marriage. She flinched. Richard and I love each other. He told me his marriage was over long before we met. How original. I turned toward my apartment. If you're here to plead his case, save your breath. I'm here to tell you to drop the lawsuit. Her voice rose. You're ruining his life. The account freeze means he can't pay his bills, can't run the business properly. You're being cruel and vindictive. I turned back slowly. I'm being vindictive? He tried to leave me with $50,000 after 45 years of marriage. He used money from our business that I helped build to buy you presents and pay for your apartment. And I'm the villain. He deserves to be happy. Then he should have divorced me honestly, fairly, and given me what I was owed. Instead, he tried to steal everything. I walked closer to her. You want to know what's cruel, Cynthia? Lying to someone for 3 years? Making them feel crazy for suspecting the truth? Trying to rob them of their future security? That's cruel. She glared at me, tears in her eyes. Richard said you'd be like this, bitter and jealous. I'm not bitter, I said, and realized it was true. I'm just done being a victim. I went inside and locked the door. My hands were shaking, but I also felt strangely energized. Richard and Cynthia were desperate. They were making mistakes, showing their hand. Thomas had been right. We were winning. I decided to take a few days to rest. The confrontation with Cynthia had drained me more than I wanted to admit. I turned off my phone, made myself comfortable, and for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. After 3 days of rest, I turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls, most from unknown numbers. But one voicemail caught my attention. It was from Richard's lawyer, Patricia Chen. Mrs. Morgan, I'd like to schedule a meeting. Just you, me, and Mr. Morgan. No lawyers present. I think we can resolve this situation more personally. Please call me back. I played the message for Thomas the next morning. He frowned. They want to meet without me present. Absolutely not. That's highly irregular and potentially dangerous. Dangerous how? They'll try to manipulate you emotionally, make promises they won't keep, maybe even record you saying something they can use against you. He shook his head firmly. I strongly advise against it. But curiosity gnawed at me. What were they planning? What if I want to hear what they have to say? Thomas studied me for a long moment. If you insist on meeting them, I'll be there. Non-negotiable. And Mrs. Morgan? Whatever they offer you, whatever they promise, don't believe it. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at a neutral location, a conference room at Patricia's law office. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple but elegant navy dress. I wanted to look composed, in control. Richard was already there when Thomas and I arrived. He'd aged in the past 2 months. New lines around his eyes, gray stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Regret? Anger? I couldn't tell. Patricia gestured for us to sit. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Morgan. I think we can resolve this matter amicably if we just talk like reasonable people. We're listening, Thomas said neutrally. Richard cleared his throat. Margaret, I've been thinking about everything that's happened. Maybe I was too harsh initially. The stress of the business, the changes in our relationship. I didn't handle things well. I said nothing, waiting. I'd like to propose a new settlement, he continued. $300,000, plus you can keep all the furniture and your car. That's significantly more than the original offer. It's also significantly less than half of what you're actually worth, Thomas pointed out. Our forensic analysis values the marital assets at over $4 million. Mrs. Morgan is entitled to half, $2 million. Patricia smiled thinly. The forensic analysis is based on speculative valuations. Mr. Morgan disputes those numbers. Mr. Morgan also disputes that he embezzled $400,000 from the business, Thomas said. But the bank records don't lie. Richard's face reddened. Those were business expenses. A BMW for your mistress is a business expense? Silence fell over the room. I watched Richard struggle to maintain composure. Finally, he turned to me directly, ignoring the lawyers. Margaret, please. We spent 45 years together. Doesn't that mean something? I'm trying to be fair here. Take the $300,000 and let's end this. You can start over. I can start over. We can both move on with our lives. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd loved, built a life with, trusted completely. And I felt nothing. No anger, no love, no pain. Just a cool, distant recognition that he was a stranger now. No, I said quietly. Richard blinked. No? You're not trying to be fair, Richard. You're trying to avoid the consequences of your actions. You embezzled money. You lied about the value of our assets. You tried to leave me destitute. I leaned forward slightly. $300,000 is insulting. I'll see you in court. Margaret, you're being unreasonable. I stood up. This meeting is over. Thomas, let's go. As I reached the door, Richard's voice stopped me. You'll regret this. When this goes to trial, everything will come out. Every argument we ever had, every private moment, every family secret. Is that really what you want? I turned back. I have nothing to hide, Richard. Do you? His face went pale. Patricia touched his arm in warning, but I'd already seen the truth in his eyes. He was bluffing, and we both knew it. That evening, my son Michael called. Mom, I talked to Sarah. We want you to know we're on your side. Dad's been trying to poison us against you, but we're not stupid. We remember how hard you worked, how much you sacrificed. My eyes stung with sudden tears. Thank you, sweetheart. We've also been talking to some of Dad's old employees. You know Bill Henderson? He worked at the shop for 20 years. He said everyone knew you were the real backbone of the business. He's willing to testify if you need him to. After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment and felt something warm spread through my chest. I wasn't alone. My children stood with me. Former employees remembered the truth. Thomas believed in my case. Richard and Cynthia were the ones who were isolated now, desperate and flailing. I could afford to wait. Justice, I was learning, doesn't rush. The knock on my door came on a Friday evening. I wasn't expecting anyone. Sarah and Michael were both working, and Thomas always called before visiting. Through the peephole, I saw Richard and Cynthia standing together. My heart jumped. They'd come to my home. Together. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. What do you want? Margaret, please. Richard's voice was soft, pleading. Can we come in? Just for a few minutes. We need to talk, and it's important. Every instinct screamed not to let them in, but I also wanted to know what they were planning. I removed the chain and stepped back, leaving the door open behind me. If I needed to scream for help, I wanted the neighbors to hear. They entered, and I was struck by how out of place they looked in my small apartment. Richard in his expensive suit, Cynthia in her designer dress. They belonged to the life I'd lost, and I belonged here now. Nice place, Cynthia said, and I couldn't tell if she was being sincere or cruel. Say what you came to say, I told them. Richard and Cynthia exchanged a glance. Then he smiled, a warm, familiar smile I'd seen 1,000 times over our marriage, the smile that had once made me feel safe. We came to apologize, he said. Both of us. We've handled this entire situation badly, and we want to make it right. I waited, silent. Cynthia stepped forward. Mrs. Morgan, Margaret, I need you to understand something. Richard and I never meant to hurt you. We fell in love. It wasn't planned, it just happened. And I know that doesn't excuse anything, but we want you to know we feel terrible about the pain we've caused. You feel terrible, I repeated flatly. Yes. She seemed encouraged by my response. And we want to make amends. Richard has a new proposal, a generous one. $500,000, the furniture, your car, and will also pay your rent here for 2 years while you get settled. $500,000. Still nowhere near half of what I was owed, but it was progress. They were getting desperate. And in exchange? I asked. You drop the lawsuit immediately, Richard said. We settle everything quietly. No trial, no more fighting. You get to move on with your life. We get to move on with ours. Everyone wins. Everyone wins, I echoed, except I lose $2 million that I'm entitled to by law. Richard's smile faltered slightly. Margaret, be realistic. A trial could take years. It'll cost you a fortune in legal fees. You're 72 years old. Do you really want to spend your remaining time fighting in court? Versus letting you steal what I earned? Yes. The warmth drained from his expression. You're being stubborn. I'm being fair. Cynthia tried again, her voice taking on a wheedling tone. Margaret, think about your children. This fight is tearing the family apart. Michael and Sarah are caught in the middle. Don't you want what's best for them? I felt a flash of anger. Don't you dare use my children to manipulate me. She's not trying to manipulate you, Richard said quickly. She's just pointing out the reality. This lawsuit is causing pain for everyone. Your children are stressed, the business is suffering, even your friends are choosing sides. Is your pride really worth all this damage? My pride? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. You had a 3-year affair. You embezzled money from our business. You tried to leave me destitute, and you're talking about my pride. Richard's mask finally slipped. His face hardened, and I saw the man he'd become, cold, calculating, and cruel. Fine. You want the truth? Here it is. You were a decent bookkeeper, Margaret, but don't fool yourself into thinking you were essential to the business. I built that company. Me. You just filed papers and smiled at customers. Any competent assistant could have done what you did. The words were designed to hurt, and they did, but I kept my face neutral. Cynthia placed a hand on his arm, but he shook her off. And you know what else? You were boring. Boring and predictable and old. Coming home to you every night was like coming home to nothing. Cynthia makes me feel alive again. She makes me feel like a man. Richard, Cynthia whispered urgently, stop. But he was on a roll now, all pretense of reconciliation abandoned. Take the $500,000, Margaret. Because if you don't, I promise you, I'll drag this trial out for years. I'll make sure every humiliating detail of our marriage becomes public record. Every argument, every failure, every inadequacy. By the time I'm done, everyone will know exactly what kind of wife you were. I looked at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and something crystallized inside me. Fear tried to surface, but I pushed it down and replaced it with something colder and harder. Get out, I said quietly. Margaret, get out of my home, now. Cynthia pulled at Richard's arm. Let's go, this was a mistake. They left, and I locked the door behind them with shaking hands. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding. He'd threatened me, tried to humiliate me, attempted to make me feel small and worthless. But I wasn't small, I wasn't worthless, and I sure as hell wasn't backing down. I called Thomas. They just left, I told him. And Thomas? I want to destroy them, completely, no mercy. Tell me everything, he said. The trial began on a cold December morning. I sat beside Thomas in the courtroom, watching Richard and Patricia enter. Cynthia wasn't there. She'd been subpoenaed to testify but was scheduled for later in the week. Judge Diana Walsh presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I'd learned from Thomas that she had a reputation for being fair but unforgiving of dishonesty. Patricia started with her opening statement, painting Richard as a self-made businessman who'd built a successful company through hard work and vision. Mrs. Morgan contributed to the household, she said, but her role in the business was minimal and ceased entirely 15 years ago. She's not entitled to half of what Mr. Morgan built. Then it was Thomas's turn. Your Honor, this is a case about theft, not just of money, but of credit, recognition, and dignity. The evidence will show that Margaret Morgan was not merely a helper in the business. She was a co-founder and equal partner who worked tirelessly for 25 years. The evidence will also show that Richard Morgan systematically rewrote history to erase her contributions, then attempted to steal her rightful share when she discovered his infidelity. Over the next 2 days, Thomas methodically built our case. He presented the original 1983 business registration, showing both our names as owners. He showed letters and documents from the 1980s and 1990s where Richard himself had referred to the business as ours and had listed me as co-owner. Bill Henderson, the former employee Michael had mentioned, testified about my role. Margaret Morgan ran that office, he said firmly. She handled everything from bookkeeping to customer relations to inventory management. The place would have fallen apart without her. Everyone knew it. 2 other former employees confirmed his testimony. Then came the forensic accountant, Dr. Rachel Kim. She walked the judge through Richard's financial irregularities with devastating precision. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Morgan diverted approximately $412,000 from business accounts to personal use, she testified. This includes $62,000 for an apartment lease, $90,000 in luxury purchases, $45,000 in hotel stays, all related to his extramarital relationship. He also systematically undervalued business assets in his financial disclosures. How significant is the undervaluation? Judge Walsh asked. He claimed the business was worth $1.2 million. Based on standard valuation methods, examining revenue, assets, client base, and market comparisons, the business is worth between $2.8 and $3.2 million. I watched Richard's face as the numbers were laid bare. He looked sick. On the third day, Richard took the stand. Patricia tried to rehabilitate his image, but Thomas's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Morgan, you testified that your wife had only a minimal role in the business. Yet I'm showing you a letter you wrote to a supplier in 1987. Can you read the highlighted section? Richard's hands trembled slightly as he held the document. It says, "Please direct all future correspondence to either myself or my business partner and wife, Margaret Morgan." Your business partner, Thomas repeated. Not your assistant, not your helper, your partner. That was just, we were married. I was being courteous. I see. And this business proposal from 1989, where you listed the company as R&M Morgan Auto Parts, owned and operated by Richard and Margaret Morgan, was that also just courtesy? I don't recall that specific document, but it's your signature at the bottom, isn't it? Yes, but... And Mr. Morgan, when did you decide to restructure the business to remove your wife's name? In 1990, on advice from my lawyer for tax purposes. For tax purposes, I see. And did those tax savings amount to the $400,000 you later stole from the business to fund your affair? Objection, Patricia stood. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Walsh said, but she was looking at Richard with open skepticism. Thomas pressed on. Mr. Morgan, you offered my client $50,000 in the initial settlement. The business alone is worth approximately $3 million. By what calculation did you arrive at $50,000 as a fair division of marital assets? Richard's face reddened. She hadn't worked in the business for 15 years. Because you convinced her to retire, telling her the business was secure and you could handle it alone. Isn't that correct? She wanted to retire. Answer the question. Did you or did you not tell her the business was successful enough that she could stop working? Yes, but no further questions. When Cynthia testified the next day, she was clearly uncomfortable. Thomas was gentle with her at first, establishing the timeline of the affair, the apartment, the gifts. Then he asked, Ms. Reeves, were you aware that Mr. Morgan was using business funds to pay for your apartment and gifts? She hesitated. I didn't think about where the money came from. You didn't think about it, even though Mr. Morgan told you he co-owned the business with his wife? He said the business was his. Thomas showed her a text message, one we'd recovered from Richard's phone records. This is a text you sent Mr. Morgan last year. Can you read it? Her face went pale. It says, "Thank you for the bracelet, baby. I hope Margaret doesn't mind you spending business money on me, LOL." The courtroom was silent. So you did know, Thomas said quietly. You knew he was stealing from his wife to buy you gifts, and you laughed about it. Cynthia started crying, but the damage was done. Judge Walsh delivered her ruling on a Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after the trial began. The courtroom was packed. My children sat behind me, along with several former employees who'd come to show support. Richard sat rigid beside Patricia, his face ashen. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony carefully, Judge Walsh began. This is one of the clearest cases of marital fraud I've encountered in 20 years on the bench. I felt Thomas's hand briefly squeeze mine in encouragement. The evidence is overwhelming that Margaret Morgan was a co-founder and equal partner in R&M Morgan Auto Parts. The original business registration, contemporaneous documents, and credible witness testimony all confirm this. Mr. Morgan's attempt to erase her contributions and claim sole ownership is not only dishonest, it's legally fraudulent. Richard's lawyer started to stand, but Judge Walsh held up a hand. I'm not finished. The forensic evidence shows that Mr. Morgan systematically embezzled marital assets to fund an extramarital affair, then deliberately undervalued the business in his financial disclosures. He lied under oath, presented fraudulent documents, and attempted to deprive his wife of her rightful share of marital property. The judge's voice grew harder. Mr. Morgan's behavior demonstrates a pattern of deceit and manipulation that this court cannot ignore. Therefore, I'm ruling as follows. She looked directly at Richard. First, the business R&M Morgan Auto Parts is declared marital property. Mrs. Morgan is entitled to a 50% share of its true value, which I'm setting at $3 million. That's $1.5 million. Patricia whispered urgently to Richard, but he seemed frozen. Second, Mr. Morgan must reimburse the marital estate for the $412,000 he embezzled for personal use. That amount will be added to Mrs. Morgan's settlement. I did the math quickly. $1.5 million plus $412,000. Third, the marital home, currently valued at $800,000, is awarded entirely to Mrs. Morgan as compensation for Mr. Morgan's fraudulent concealment of assets and waste of marital property. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Judge Walsh struck her gavel once. Fourth, Mr. Morgan will pay Mrs. Morgan's legal fees in their entirety, which currently total approximately $160,000. I glanced back at my children. Sarah was crying. Michael had his arm around her, grinning. Fifth, I'm ordering an IRS audit of R&M Morgan Auto Parts for the past 7 years, as the evidence suggests potential tax fraud related to the personal use of business funds. Copies of all financial evidence will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities. Richard finally reacted, half rising from his chair. Your Honor, you can't— Sit down, Mr. Morgan. Judge Walsh's voice cut like ice. I can, and I have. Your behavior in this case has been reprehensible. You attempted to rob your wife of her life's work and retirement security. You lied repeatedly under oath. You showed no remorse whatsoever. She looked at her notes one more time. The marital assets, by my calculation, total approximately $4.3 million. Normally, an equitable distribution would give each party roughly half. However, given Mr. Morgan's fraud, embezzlement, and waste of marital assets, I'm awarding Mrs. Morgan $2.9 million, approximately 67% of the total. Mr. Morgan can keep what's left after satisfying this judgment. Patricia was frantically scribbling notes. Richard looked like he might be sick. This judgment is effective immediately. Mr. Morgan has 90 days to satisfy the monetary portions. The business will be independently appraised within 30 days, and Mrs. Morgan's share will be calculated accordingly. She may choose to take her share as a lump sum buyout or retain ownership interest. That will be her decision. Judge Walsh looked at me directly for the first time. Mrs. Morgan, I want you to know that your documentation and record-keeping were instrumental in achieving this outcome. Your attention to detail over 45 years preserved evidence that would otherwise have been lost. You should be commended for that. Thank you, Your Honor, I managed to say. We're adjourned. The gavel struck one final time. The courtroom erupted. My children rushed forward, embracing me. Former employees shook my hand, congratulated me. Thomas was grinning broadly, already talking about the mechanics of collecting the judgment. I turned to look at Richard. He sat slumped in his chair, Patricia leaning over him, speaking urgently. Cynthia had appeared from somewhere and was standing nearby, crying. Richard looked up, and our eyes met across the courtroom. I felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, no sadness. Just a quiet sense of closure. Justice had been served. Later that evening, Thomas called me. Margaret, I need to tell you something. Richard's business partners contacted me. They want to buy you out. They'll pay $1.7 million for your 50% share, cash, within 30 days. That's more than the appraised value, I said, confused. They want Richard out. The IRS investigation, the embezzlement, the negative publicity. They're done with him. Buying you out gives them leverage to force him out entirely. Thomas paused. It's a good offer, Margaret. I'd recommend taking it. What happens to Richard? He'll be forced to sell his stake too, probably at a loss given the circumstances. With the money he owes you, plus legal fees, plus the IRS investigation, he'll be lucky to walk away with anything. I thought about the house in Connecticut where we'd raised our children, now mine alone. The $2.9 million settlement. The victory. Tell them I accept, I said. Margaret, Thomas said quietly, you won completely. Congratulations. After we hung up, I stood in my small apartment for the last time. Tomorrow I'd start looking for a new home, something comfortable, but not extravagant. Something that was mine. Richard had tried to take everything. Instead, he'd lost everything. And I had one. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new home, a charming colonial in a quiet neighborhood about 30 miles from where Richard and I had lived. It was smaller than our old house, but it was mine. Truly mine. Sarah was helping me unpack boxes while Michael assembled furniture in the living room. We'd spent the morning hanging curtains and arranging pictures. Mom, you seem happy, Sarah said, carefully unwrapping china from newspaper. Really happy, not just pretending. I considered this. I am happy. I didn't think I would be, but I am. Do you ever think about Dad? Sometimes, I admitted, but not the way I used to. I don't miss him. I don't hate him. He's just someone I used to know. The settlement had been finalized 2 months ago. The business partners had paid me the $1.7 million for my share, plus the additional amounts Richard owed me. After legal fees and taxes, I'd netted approximately $2.4 million, more money than I'd ever imagined having. I'd bought this house outright for $350,000. I'd set up trust funds for my grandchildren. I'd donated $50,000 to a women's shelter. The rest was invested conservatively, generating enough income that I'd never have to worry about money again. More than that, I'd started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping other women navigate divorce. My experience, my meticulous records, my hard-won knowledge, I could use it to help others. Have you heard anything about Dad? Michael called from the living room. Only what you've told me, I said carefully. My children still saw Richard occasionally, and I'd never tried to interfere with their relationship with their father. It's not good, Mom, Sarah said quietly. The IRS investigation found major tax irregularities. He owes back taxes and penalties, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. The business partners forced him out completely. He's trying to find work, but at 68, with his reputation damaged. She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. And Cynthia? I asked, surprising myself with my curiosity. She left him, Michael said, emerging from the living room with an Allen wrench. About a month ago. Guess the romance wasn't as strong when Dad didn't have money anymore. I should have felt satisfaction at that, but I only felt a distant sadness. Richard had destroyed our life together for an affair that hadn't even lasted a year after the truth came out. I heard he's living in a small apartment in Bridgeport, Sarah added, working as a consultant for an auto parts wholesaler, making a fraction of what he used to earn. The doorbell rang, saving me from having to respond. It was my neighbor, Helen, a widow in her late 60s who'd brought over a casserole as a welcome gift. We'd become friendly over the past few weeks. I won't keep you. I know you're busy unpacking, she said cheerfully. But I wanted to invite you to our book club next Thursday. We're reading The Dutch House. Have you read it? I haven't, but I'd love to join, I told her honestly. After she left, I found myself smiling. A book club? Friendly neighbors? A home I'd chosen for myself. volunteering work that felt meaningful, my children's support and love. This was my life now. Not the life I'd planned at the beginning, but a good life nonetheless. That evening, after my children had left, I sat on my back porch watching the sunset. My phone rang. Thomas. Margaret, I thought you'd want to know. Richard's bankruptcy filing was approved today. Bankruptcy? Between the settlement, the IRS penalties, and his other debts, he couldn't make ends meet. He's filed for Chapter 7. He'll lose his car, most of his possessions. He'll be starting over from nothing. I absorbed this information. The man who'd tried to leave me with $50,000 was now destitute. The man who'd told me I was worthless and boring and old was now alone, broke, and facing a bleak future. How do you feel? Thomas asked gently. How did I feel? I searched my heart carefully. I feel free, I finally said. Not because he's suffering, just because it's finally, completely over. It is over, Thomas agreed. You won, Margaret, not just in court, in life. You rebuilt. He didn't. After we hung up, I remained on the porch as darkness fell. Fireflies appeared in the yard, tiny points of light in the dusk. Somewhere nearby, I heard children laughing. Richard had tried to steal my future. Instead, I'd claimed it for myself. And this future, this small house, this quiet evening, this peaceful solitude, was worth more than all the years we'd spent together. Looking back now, I realize the most valuable thing I kept wasn't the money or the house. It was something simpler, my dignity and my sense of self-worth. Here's what I learned at 72 years old. Never stop keeping records. Never let anyone convince you that your contributions don't matter. And never, ever settle for less than you deserve, just because someone hopes you're too tired to fight. I was 72 when my life fell apart. I'm 73 now, and I've never been happier. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have signed those papers? Would you have fought back? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe. There's power in shared experiences. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Never.